And good morning, my beautiful America. Welcome back to the All American Book Club. I am so honored to be here with you guys here in our nation's capital. And we have such a treat for you this morning. We're bringing over to the show for the very first time. I promised you the summer book read list would be very impactful. Well, we are getting to bring over to the show for the very first time Amy Lynn Green, and I'm showing this book up on the screen for everybody who's watching on YouTube, but those who are not watching on YouTube, tuning into the FM station, you can go pick up a copy, The Codebreaker's Daughter by Amy Lynn Green. Amy, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking at your bio, and I think we have just about everything in common.
Oh, I love
down
that.
to the library cards. You are a lover of books, history, and library cards. I mean, does it get any better than that?
I lived in the library as a child, and now I do again as the mom of young children. So,
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you for being here for the first time. And
thanks for having me.
I'm looking at all of your books. You definitely very much zero in on a very special time in our nation's history, World War II. And I've always said personally, I should have been born in a time where I could have been a young woman in World War II. Because I love Rosie the Riveter. Anything that has to do with WASP, I would have loved to have flown a plane, you know, just being a part of the greatest generation. So you really zero in on this in your book. So let's break it down. Let's start right with your book, The Codebreaker's Daughter. Let's talk about your characters. Go ahead.
So this is my first novel that's written part in World War I and part in World War II. And that's because I knew I wanted to write a mother-daughter story. So the World War I time frame is following Lillian, who is a codebreaker during the early days of America figuring out what they were doing in the global code-breaking scene. And then the other half of the novel follows both mother and her daughter Dinah in World War II and kind of the behind the scenes of espionage in Washington, D.C. So really fun to research. I love packing real historical characters and real historical incidents into the book. So without giving away any spoilers, there are a lot of fun ones in this one.
Well, I'm going to mention to you, I did not realize until I was doing my own research, seeing that Elizabeth and her husband were actual, factual, and how you intertwine them with Dinah and her new role and the background of her relationship with Lily. Can you talk just a little bit about the real code breakers and what they were to American history?
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the fun things about this novel is the first time I have pretty strong secondary characters who were actual historical people. So, William and Elizabeth Friedman started out basically the US code breaking program. When America entered World War I, we weren't ready. We were not prepared like the rest of Europe was to enter a global war. And radio had changed everything when it came to how complicated ciphers needed to be. And well, as soon as we joined the war, we had all of these ciphers to break, and only a few people in the whole country knew how to do it. And some of them were Shakespeare scholars on a millionaire's estate in rural Illinois. And this millionaire, George Fabian, said to the US government, hey, it looks like you don't have anyone else to break these ciphers. Send them our way because these Shakespeare scholars have been looking for secret codes in the original manuscripts of Shakespeare's plays. And so they know something about ciphers when no one else does. So a bunch of English majors were the ones who started off America's code breaking program.
So let's talk about the code breaking program. I don't think a lot of people, unless you were a lover of World War II and World War I and military history, I don't think a lot of people realize what the code breakers did to basically save the country.
Yeah. It was so William and Elizabeth were the two main people to organize this code breaking force. They're a married couple, really brilliant. They served from World War I all the way through the 40s and beyond. And what they basically did, they got messages encoded in other languages, and they were basically told, figure out what these say. We don't have a lot of systems. We have a few books that have been written on the subject, and they had to figure it out as they went, including some of the codes were written in other languages. They had some of them were multiple levels of encryption. And reading interviews with the Friedmans, they couldn't explain how they got it all done, especially the first year of the war. They
Yeah.
basically just said you sat down with your team, you did your frequency analysis to see which letters were used most often, but for the most part, you did what you had to do because you had to. The pressure was on, and you were able to figure it out because there was no other choice. Which is
Yeah.
wild,
No,
wild.
it is. It really is. And as we give a little sneak peek into this book
Hmm.
for, our summer readers, and I'm already, I have purchased this book for as gifts for, the people who I know in my space. And I know that we promoted a lot on our Instagram page at All American Book, really promoting this book for you. But it's, how do I put it? You intertwine the fiction with the factual.
Hmm.
And, I don't think when we talk about the code breakers today, what would you translate the code breakers today compared to? So we see them in the world, World War I, World War II. Who do you
Hmm.
think they are today as you've been doing your research? If you could basically mirror them to our modern day, are they our modern day spies at the CIA? Are they our modern day XY? What do you see them?
Yeah, the OSS was the predecessor to the CIA and to a lot of the organizations that are featured in the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. So those are the counterparts, but also I just think of the people who are working behind the scenes, that you're never going to know their names, and that history might forget about. And that's why I love writing about these code breakers, because they did such important work, but it wasn't always dramatic. It wasn't always in the public spotlight. In fact, because what they were working on was so secret, they couldn't even talk about it to each other. William and Elizabeth in World War II worked for two different branches of the military. They
Yeah.
had no idea what the other person was doing, which would be so difficult. And what a sacrifice they had to make to put in all of those hours in very grueling work, that they would never get any credit for. So, yes,
Yeah.
definitely like spies, but also just the people working in offices on projects that you're never going to know about, that are keeping our country safe.
Yes, yes, they are selfless service.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Selfless
Yep.
service. Absolutely. There were two other things I noticed in your book, and you flavor it in there, but you bring it to light where it really wasn't talked about back then, and that is mental health, the depression piece, and then also the PTS piece of working and being in war and serving in war. And you bring those out in William,
Hmm.
and you bring those out in other characters of your book. So what was it like intertwining, and did William really have these issues that you cite? Is that
Yes.
those are factual?
Hmm. Yep. Everything with the Friedmans is historical. And a lot of the times, the way that he would talk about his depression was words that he actually used in letters and in journal entries that we still have. Yeah, it was a little hard to research the mental health part, because I have one character, Lillian, who has some family members who had mental health troubles. So I had to research what happens to poor people
Yes.
who have mental illness at
Yes.
that time, and especially before there was any known ways of treatment. You have to look at what did asylums look like, forced surgeries, all sorts of really dark and difficult things to think about. And then with someone like William, who is very acclaimed, he's a professional, he's well respected, and he's struggling. And for him, I knew exactly what sort of treatment he went through, and what the fact that the stigma of mental illness was so strong that he couldn't talk about it to anyone. He didn't even like talking about it to his family members. So I wanted to portray that in the book, because especially after World War I, when so many veterans were coming back with PTSD and other struggles that weren't even able to be identified yet. World War I and World War II really made people think, we need to figure this out, and we need to do something, and we can't let people suffer without giving them ways to help. So including Lillian and her family history, and William and his struggles,
Yes.
was a way for me to talk about that important historical fact.
Is it something that you chose to highlight in your book because you have seen it in a personal or professional manner? in
Oh,
current
yeah.
day? Okay.
Yeah. There have been a lot of people really close to me who have struggled and they were not understood by those around them.
Yes.
And I think it's hard, right? Like it's hard to know what to say to somebody who's going through something that you don't relate to. So I understand why people say the wrong things or um, just want they would rather not know. They just try to push it away. But these are people we love, right? These are people we care about. And so even if we don't always understand, what does it look like to listen and to be there as a friend? And so that's what Lillian does for the Friedmans in this book. And that was something that I care a lot about personally.
Well, let's put out a PSC really quickly because we know that current numbers of 22 a day, it's always 22 a day that commit suicide of
Mhm.
our veterans. And you know what? There's so many that are doing it also active duty.
Mhm.
And because of the isolation, because of the cultures that we live in, having everything at our fingertips doesn't always make us happier.
So
And
true.
so I want to just, call it out there to those who are listening. This audience is all about God, country, and family. We have a lot of veteran listeners, active duty, those who are working and serving in the White House and on Capitol Hill. And the 988 hotline is key
Mhm.
to those who may say, I can't talk about it because my coworker may say something. I can't talk about it. Will I lose rank? I can't talk about it because my spouse probably won't understand. But 9 times out of 10, we will be there to listen and we will be there to understand. It's just a matter of getting the right help and to basically help save a life. And so you portray that in this book, in The Codebreaker's Daughter. And we also need to bring it to life and to really talk about it, not make it taboo. And I always say, I'm not trying to be critical or slap the hands of the church, but we do go and sit in our pretty little pews and our pretty little Sunday outfits, and then it's outside of those four walls is where the action needs to take place.
Yep.
And that's where we need to talk about these issues, and they need to be talked about. So anyway, that's my soapbox. That's my PS.
Good. I like it.
Oh,
Say it
well,
loud. We love it.
loud. We have to talk about it, Amy. We
Yep.
really do.
Hmm.
So let's do this. Let's transition into. I was looking at all of your books, and I'm basically, I got your book, your art copy,
Hmm.
and I got it in the mail. And I said, I'm in love with this book. I showed it to my father, all the book copies, because he's the one that led me into reading and just a love of literature. And he said, I've got to have this. I'm like, no, I get it first. So, but then it led me to do this. I'm like, I saw all of your other books and I'm starting to order all of them because I'm going through all of them because you
Mhm.
focus on the World War II, the greatest generation.
Yes.
And our next generation, they're not getting this in school. How
Mhm.
can we best educate the next generation on the greatest generation?
Well, what I loved is my first book, Things We Didn't Say, is set in Minnesota, which is where I live. And the
Yeah.
reason I chose to write about it is I was just exploring local history. I moved here after college and I didn't know anything about Minnesota. And there are a number of historical sites in the Twin Cities area near where I live that highlighted aspects of Minnesota history throughout the ages, including a lot on World War II and what was going on here then. There were German prisoners of war who were farming in our communities, and what was the local reaction to that, and what tensions did that cause? And there was also a secret Japanese American language school for people who were going to be spies and translators in the Pacific Theater. Long story as to why that got to be in Minnesota, of all places, but really cool stuff. And I just think any educators who are taking kids, it helps so much to have a personal connection to history. So if you can find local stories, what were people in your area doing in World War II? Interviews. We have so many interviews with the Greatest Generation. We have a wealth. Even as a researcher, there's just a wealth of people
Mhm.
sharing their stories and a wealth of letters and diaries that have been preserved. And to make that instead of a boring list of dates and
Yeah.
names, which is never going to capture anyone's heart. My history teachers in high school, I had the privilege of having teachers who told me history is stories, and it's the history of a conflict of ideas and also the ordinary people that lived in extraordinary times. And that's why I love history. And I think that's what we are missing. I think today, if people think about history and if there's a teenager thinking, oh, it's just, when did D-Day take place, blah, 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 blah. Not exciting. But if you like read the story of a person who was there, instantly interesting. It doesn't matter what generation you're a part of. Stories capture our hearts. So that's what I would say is the more stories that we can tell and when we talk about history, the more exciting it's going to be to this generation.
Well said, Amy. Well said. I want to also ask you about a couple other books I saw on your website.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, can you, one, I know this one just came out, but
Mm-hmm.
can you also give me any sneak peek into what's coming? Oh, you have that look. There's got to
I
be another.
do.
Yes.
I'm right in the middle of working on the next one, so it's very much on my mind. I can't because I'm a very bad outliner. The plot changes a number of times, sometimes even character names. But I can tell you that the next book I'm working on is a World War II retelling of Little Women. So what
Oh,
would happen if
oh,
the Alcott sisters were in the 1940s? I'm having a lot of
oh,
fun.
what a brilliant, what a brilliant bridge to build. That is amazing. Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can't either. So, and I'm the one writing it. So
26 edition, or is this going to be later in 25?
this is going to be later in 26. So since I have a baby and a toddler, my writing pace is a little bit slow. So
Oh, we understand completely.
yeah.
With just a couple minutes left here at the show,
Mhm.
what else? What is your call to action? I mean, you eloquently talked about just lovers of story and history and bringing it to life for this next generation. But what are other things that really inspired you on your journey to really bring you to this point? Because you were publishing, you had a whole nother journey, a whole nother life.
Yeah.
And so now you're in this new phase, mama, and
Mhm.
also author, writer, etc. And
Mhm.
I have no doubt this is going to be a bestseller. I mean, I'm putting it out there. It's a bestseller. It is a bestseller. So talk about the journey, talk about the inspiration, and what really is your heart and soul call to action as you are just diving into these amazing collaborations.
I really what inspires me is the people that I encounter every day. And that's one thing that as a writer or a reader or a human being, I feel like is important is that everyone has a story. And I tell that to people when I'm speaking. I've spoken to groups of teenagers before saying like, if your grandpa or, like ask him what was his life like? Like ask questions of the people in your life, especially the people who don't talk much about their past. Find
Mhm.
out what their story is. Find out who they are and what inspires them and what drives them, what they were afraid of, what things that they feel like were important events that they lived through. Because not only is that a way to spark a love of story, but it's a way to show love and respect for the people in your life. And the fact that every person around you has a story and it views themselves as the main character of their own story. And then you think about how do I treat that person, knowing that that person has a life just like mine and loves just like mine and fears just like mine. And I think that's one of the things that as a writer, like as a reader and a writer,
Mhm.
books help you have empathy for others. You may not understand what it's like to walk through something. You read a book about it, you understand more than you did before, and you can care more about things outside of your own experience. So
Mhm.
there's my soapbox.
I love
Something
it.
I love about books.
I love it. Final question.
Yeah.
Okay, who is your favorite character in the Codebreaker's daughter? And we'll leave
Ah,
it right there to give a little nugget for our audience.
I mean, I do really love Roger, who is Lillian's husband.
Yes.
He's
Okay.
just great. He's not a main character. He
No,
shows
he's
up.
not. Yeah.
He is kind of a welcome balance to all of the chaos that goes on in certain characters' life. And he's just steady and reliable and reminds me of my husband. So maybe I'm biased.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
That's my favorite, I think.
I was not expecting that answer.
I have a lot of like it's hard. I can't really pick between Dinah and Lillian because I've spent so much time with them that I
Yeah.
can't choose. So as far as secondary characters, I'm gonna say Roger.
Okay. Okay. Roger. Okay.
Yeah, how about you?
I was definitely going to say Dinah.
Oh, she's
Just,
great.
just because she's fresh starting out, but she's so intuitive. And, just what she's uncovering about her mother and her mother's past. It's just this, you add this whole suspense and mystery piece to the whole premise of everything, along with having World War I and World War II history around you. So, on that note, Amy Lynn Green, thank you so much for being here at the All American Book Club. We are so honored to have you here. Will you please come back? Because I cannot.
Oh, sure. I love talking about books. I could do this all day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. For all those who are tuning in, stay tuned. We'll be right back for our next segment.